Good evening. For those of you I've not had the pleasure to meet, I'm Richard Sommer, the Dean of the Daniels Faculty, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's Kohn Shnier Architects Lecture and to introduce you to tonight's speaker, Andrés Jaque. But before doing that, I'd like to take a moment to thank Professor John Shnier and Kohn Shnier Architects for their generous support of this evening's lecture. John is a partner, along with Martin Kohn, of Kohn Shnier Architects, and they run what they call a balanced practice engaged in the larger design community here in Toronto. I actually have never asked this. I'm not sure what a balanced practice means, but I think it might have to do with a balancing act as well.
I've never heard that before.
Really? We just made it up?
Someone made it up.
Okay. So, Kohn Shnier have won many, because John's not giving a lecture tonight, I won't go into all the awards he and Marty have won, but they have done many and built many beautiful projects. And John, one of John's early distinctions was he was the first to win the Canadian Prix de Rome in architecture in 1987. John has generously supported the Daniels faculty over many years with the goal of contributing to initiatives, and if this quote isn't right, you'll correct me too, right? The quote, make for a richer learning experience for students and colleagues, end quote. And I should say that John does this actually day in and day out with his teaching, his work with students, and I would say also his generosity as a colleague. So this is about I think it's the fourth year we've been doing this particular lecture, and previous lectures have featured David Van Severen from the firm Office, Kirsten Geer's David Van Severen in Brussels, Antoine Garcia Abril from Ensemble Studio in Madrid, and last year, Carla Yosaba from Carla Yosaba Architect in Brazil. So would you all please join me in thanking John for his generosity. Okay, now on to our featured speaker. Andrés Jaque is the founder of the Madrid and New York-based Office for Political Innovation, a practice that strives to, quote, bring inclusivity into daily life, end quote. Jaque's work and the work of his office operates on a number of related tracks, part research and speculation on a set of ideas and practices associated with architecture and urban culture, many of them, I'd say, received or retrieved from the scrap heap of the past, and part public polemic and provocation in the here and now. The work aims to be controversial and even sometimes uses humor very effectively, but is actually dead serious, and especially in Jaque's ability to spin together multiple forms of visual, textual, and materially based media is almost, I would say, a kind of Gesamtkunstwerk, a kind of engages in the idea of a kind of constructed totality, recalling works of total theater or total works of art. And in this work, he manages to create narratives that illuminate many of the political, economic, and the environmental dilemmas facing architecture today. So the work is purposeful in taking many forms, and like some of the best artists working in previous decades, does not stick to one medium or hew to any one aesthetic genre. And this, I think, is still unusual, and I think should be less unusual for architects, but it is. Through research, writing, installations, publications, performance, and even some buildings that are themselves a form of performance, Jaque's work challenges us to examine what is often hidden from sight and consider the political dimensions of our cities and buildings, particularly by reflecting on what he refers to as, quote, the diversity of ordinary life, end quote. In this work, one can see many provocative echoes from the Situationists in mid-century France to the kind of experiments in domestic architecture that were happening in Italy in the early 1970s to what my colleague Margaret Crawford called everyday urbanism starting in the 1990s. And we were all in this kind of thinking, students of figures like Pierre Bardot and particularly Henri Lefebvre and his call, starting actually almost between 75 and 100 years ago, his call to critically examine the quotidian, or we could say the architecture of the everyday. So I would say what we're going to see tonight is really reinvigorating this tradition. And I'll give you a bit of a prequel to what I think we may see some of these and may not some of these, a kind of prequel to the kinds of work I'm referring to. In 2012, Jaque's architectural performance piece, IKEA Disobedience, which was acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York, was made out of easily procured and curated furniture from IKEA. And he deployed this furniture as a set for local community members to perform, quote, everyday private talents, behaviors, and discussions, end quote, and explored the political potential of the domestic genre. In the same year, he filled the Barcelona pavilion, the reconstructed Temple of Mies, with what Dezeen magazine termed to be junk from its basement. The items displayed included a vacuum cleaner, several pieces of broken glass, and salt once used to clean the pool water. The piece was titled Phantom, and the exhibit highlighted that which others who had previously studied the building ignored, and the role of, quote, architecture as a social type of construction. And I didn't get to see this piece, but I always think about that pavilion when I first went to see it after it had been reconstructed, that I wish it had been actually a little bit dirtier, because I might have not almost broken my nose when I visited the pavilion and tried to reenact all the formalist theories that my mentors had constructed about the building by walking around, and then I slammed my face into a sheet of glass in doing that. But I digress. So I think probably in that exhibition I wouldn't have had that problem. So at the most recent Venice Biennale, Jaque and his office mounted the project Sales Oddity, Milano 2 and the Politics of Direct-to-Income TV Urbanism, which looked at Milano Do, a new town built for upper middle class families in the 1970s, was almost kind of proto-Berlusconi, which included, among other things, a private television station. The project explored, again, in the words of Jaque and his firm, how the power of media occupies other social spaces, both physically and politically. The project received the Silver Lion Award for Best Research Project, and I can say, because I got to see this, this mostly film-based project in the Monda Italia exhibition, it was one of the most kind of gripping and compelling things in a show, which was quite, an exhibition which was quite mixed. So this past year, Jaque's office was the winner of MoMA PS1's 2015 Young Architects Program. I should say edging out our own Benjamin Dillenberger, who was also a finalist for that with another amazing entry. Jaque's winning project, COSMO, which I hope maybe we can hear more about tonight, brings to light a system of pipes that work to purify drinking water. The movable installation not only draws attention to the engineered systems that are usually out of sight in our cities and that provide us with easy access to what is a kind of essential element, but also builds awareness of those who lack such infrastructure and access to drinking water that this kind of infrastructure provides. Most recently, Jaque and the Office for Political Innovation mounted a performance piece entitled Superpowers of 10 at the inaugural Chicago Architecture Biennale, a multimedia play based on themes and narratives and histories underlying the famous Charles and Ray Eames film produced for IBM in 1977. Their film was titled Powers of 10. I assume many of you, and if this, have seen it, and if the students here have not seen it, can you watch it on YouTube now? Powers of 10? Not yet? It should. So I was lucky enough to see this performance. It was actually mounted in a hotel taken over the Chicago Athletic Club, which is formerly a men's club. So there was a whole weird domestic mashup genre, although I wasn't in my pajamas when I watched it. So there was this mix. But this performance also, I'd say, had a very very serious aspect to it, but there were moments of that were deadpan funny and lyrical. So I think this is also remounted from an earlier version of this, which was presented in a show for the Lisbon Architectural Triennale, New Publics. So there are other projects I'm not mentioning. Work by the Office for Political Innovation has been exhibited at MAC, the Austrian Museum of Applied Arts, the Contemporary Art in Vienna, the London Design Museum, and the Roy and Edna Disney Cal Arts Theater in Los Angeles, among other galleries and exhibition spaces. In addition to his work with the Office of Political Innovation, Jaque is a professor of advanced design at Columbia University's School of Architecture. Maybe you can explain what advanced design is as opposed to design, and a visiting professor at Princeton School of Architecture. In his talk tonight, Jaque will be talking, I think, although we haven't talked about this, about architecture's role, the role architecture has in often separating rather than understanding the intertwined and interdependent nature of phenomena such as cities, domestic space, infrastructure, and nature, and how we need to change this. I guess in the way that the Eames is implied, by somehow making architecture both bigger and smaller. So with that, please welcome Andrés Jaque to the podium.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for being here. Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. Okay, I'll go right to the point. I have to check the time. I was asked. Okay. Okay, this is the work that we've been doing in the last years, and as it was mentioned in the presentation, we've been doing many things that we could recognize easily as architecture, like buildings, like these ones, but we've been doing also many other things. In a way, this is something that was not that much intended, but in a series of cases that we found that there was kind of a need to go farther from doing the building, and the building had to come with something else, some kind of ideas, some words, some publications, some performances, things that were needed to make the architectural action relevant and to make it successful in intervening daily life. So for me, this is kind of an acknowledge that daily life is producing the intersection of many different technologies that are operating at different scales, different times, different languages, different technologies, different even politics, and in a way, the architecture happens in the association of all these things, or at least that's what I want to think, and it's the approach that I want to practice. This is some of the buildings that we've been doing. This is the Plasencia Clergy House, for instance. This is the interior of the Clergy House. This is, for instance, IKEA Disobedience. This is the TUPPER HOME. This is the Rolling House for the Rolling Society. This is the Sweet Parliament Home in Gwangju, South Korea. This is the ESCARAVOX in Madrid. This is the house in Never Neverland in Ibiza. But behind them, there's a need, or kind of within them, there's a number of kind of principles and strategies that are very important for us. I would like to do this talk a little bit like a flashback. So I would like to start by, as I did, showing you the images and then go a little bit to what's the project that is behind them and that is kind of going through all of them. So I'm going to do that talking of four kind of statements. The first of it is architecture as render society. This is the installation that was mentioned, the Phantom Mises Render Society that we did in the Barcelona Pavilion. All these things are things that normally are not there. Basically, not to have them there is very important, and to keep these things kind of hidden, there's a basement that was constructed as part of the reconstruction in 1986. It was opened, and even though the original pavilion had a tiny basement, the people, the architects, and the institutions that reconstructed the pavilion decided to have a basement. The basement is the place now where all these things happen. The broken pieces, the aging components of the pavilion. So, for instance, when we see the curtain, it's always like this. When it starts to do something like this, it's taken down to the basement. So the basement and the upper floor gives the same kind of relationship that Dorian Gray with his portrait. The portrait is something that you need to keep kind of hidden, but it's needed for the other part to exist. When we see in detail what's going on there, there's things that are very important. Like, for instance, this is the result of a first attempt to have a kind of building solution, a constructive solution for the pond, the one with the Kolbe sculpture, but it didn't work. These plexiglass, these acrylic panels, curved themselves with the action of the sun, and therefore they were removed and they were replaced by glass. And this is very interesting for me because somehow the result of the experiment is kind of valuable for the history of the pavilion, but it needs to remain kind of unknown by the misknowers that visit the pavilion. So this condition that all these things in a way are valuable because they produce the upper floor, but at the same time there's a need for an architecture that hides them up down there is very interesting. For instance, these are the materials that are, or the tools that are used for the maintenance of the pavilion, or these are the equipments that are used for events that make the pavilion economically feasible. So this is needed to pay the pavilion, but the minute that they're not using it anymore, they're brought back so they remain invisible, or, well, all these things. Even the office, or the place where the employees of the pavilion have lunch, and they do their dishes. What is important for me is what's going on here around the microwave, because these people are not that different from Mies. Mies himself, you know, that he spent half of his life doing this kind of collage that were not that different from the ones that the employees are doing now. And for instance, this is the cat Niebla. She lives in the basement. And actually, she's shaped, her body is shaped by the basement because by being so long in the dark of the basement, she developed photophobia. You see, her eyes are kind of weird. And she's only taken at night upstairs for an hour, so she makes sure that there's no mice and rats in the upper floor. So in a way, she's playing a key role, but she's always shaped by the role that she keeps. So she's part of the cosmopolitical design of the pavilion. She's designing the ecosystem of the pavilion by hunting the mice, but at the same time, she's shaped by this kind of transience between the upper floor and the lower floor. This is the difference between the upper floor and the basement. And for me, this is kind of a challenge. So the upstairs thing is an architecture of the confirmation. It's something that basically we go there as misknowers and we recognize what we've seen before. Whereas this basement is kind of an architecture of the contingency, of the everyday life, of everything that is required to make the everyday as it is. But in a way, the upper floor requires all that everyday, kind of all the evidences of the everyday life to be removed. So that confirmation is kind of frozen and is not challenged by life. I think that there's kind of a challenge here that is somehow to bring back a feeling of Mies, something that Mies was doing that was much more interesting than this recognition that the pavilion is doing now. When we look at these compositions that are, I insist, not that different to the ones that the people are doing down there by putting together heterogeneous materials that get to them, invitations from galleries, things that they take from the paper, something that is really what Mies was doing. When Georgi Kepes was explaining in this kind of association, these compositions and the way they were discussing the Bauhaus, he always says that the notion of transparency that were moved by them was a political one that was bringing together heterogeneous components to a common ground in which they reclaimed to be occupying a space, all of them an independent space. This is kind of a political compositional take. We could see that Mies van der Rohe was not about that much about denying the possibility of heterogeneity to be brought together, but actually it was probably one of the central aspects of its work. When he arrived to the US, he was asked in a famous interview what was his training, what was initially the education that brought him into architecture, and he said it was not architectural magazines, but it was political magazines, but not the politics of the political parties, the politics as Walter Lippmann would talk of politics. Walter Lippmann, as you know, is the founder of the theories on public space and public domain and public opinion. And in a way, I think there's a need for architecture, or there's an opportunity that I want to work on, of bringing back this way of thinking of the material politics that architecture play, by bringing heterogeneity together and give the different components society is made of a common space, or a space of its own in a common ground. This is of course, we know all Silvio Berlusconi, for some people, unfortunately, but let's say from several perspectives, unfortunately, but we know him. But when we think of Silvio Berlusconi, we mainly think that his power comes from political parties and things like media and football, and that's, of course, true, but it's not the only true. When we go to his origins, what made him important in a way and made him powerful was what he did with architecture, with urbanism, namely what he did in places like Milano 2. This is the most important development that he did, and it was part of this thing of being, as you know, a singer in nightclubs, and that was where he got his money. He became the owner of the nightclub in which he was singing, and then he got financially trustable to start doing things like this. When we look at this, probably we find this place quite conventional, like many satellite cities in the area. This was opened in 1968, and it looks like this kind of Italian rational vernacular that was invented at that time by a series of architects that were hired by Silvio Berlusconi. So they were bringing kind of a rational architecture that you can see, for instance, here or here, but they brought, for instance, all their vernacular elements, starting by the red color that in a country that was so much sensitive to the great concrete of modern architecture. To bring the red was already kind of a statement. But but also he brought the roofs, the mansard and roofs, these kind of blinds, a whole rhetoric of the vernacular Lombardia where it was built. Okay, but what is important is not necessarily that development of a style, which is kind of probably a little bit dull and not that interesting. But what is that project was about? It was advertised like the city of the number one, la città dei numero uno. The place where the number ones could be kind of given a house and a whole environment where they could escape from the city. These were the number ones. They hired very expensive at that time photographers and actors. They did audiences to hire these actors and these models to produce these kind of images that were published in the most important magazine at that time, Vogue fashion magazine. But it could only work with something that was hidden. Again, a basement in which all the super sophisticated at that time plumbing was brought. It was Toepfer, it was Viticino, it was a number of super important companies that were leading the evolution of European technology for housing, the ones that were innovating all these systems and using them for the first time in Milano 2. This is the underground galleries that distribute all the water, electricity, but also something else. Because underneath the lake, through a series of kind of even accidental events, it ended up having this TV set that first was Tele Milano and then became Mediaset, and it became the whole compound that made Berlusconi, media compound that made Berlusconi important. Why there was a relationship between pipes, architecture, and TV here? Because basically, by concentrating and centralizing all the services, they gained the opportunity, and because they wanted to have these vernacular looking buildings with mansarded roofs, they avoided to have aerials, TV aerials on top of the buildings. And to do that, they concentrated all the TV sign in one point with one aerial, and they wired all the apartments in the underground galleries to that single aerial system. By doing that, they gained the opportunity at one point to plug in a TV channel. They did it initially with a very cheap TV, and no one thought that it would be such an important thing. But it was part of what they called a polyedric design, a design that was operating in the architecture, in the engineering, and also in the media. They were thinking of communal magazines, but when they saw the power of TV, they immediately make it grow. And it ended up being this huge compound in which apartments, the real apartments of Milano Due, and then growing in Milan, and then growing in southern Italy, and then growing in northern Italy, and then jumping to Spain, to France, to the UK, to the Netherlands, now to Russia and China, they reproduce homes in a medially, or hosted in the media, mirror apartment, where everything that happens in ordinary houses is reproduced. So when people after lunch is having a coffee, they switch on the TV and there's someone having coffee. When they're going to bed, they switch on TV and there's someone in bed. When they have lunch, there's someone having lunch. And in the morning, when they're having breakfast, there's someone doing breakfast. Every single situation, it's reproduced in this mirror TV. But of course, we know that this mirror TV is slightly different to daily life in the way that everything is transformed into a consumption pattern. This was invented by Publitalia, the company that Silvio Berlusconi opened in the late 80s, and it's totally transformed the way TV is being performed all around the world. When we look at the whole thing, we see that the urbanism that Silvio Berlusconi first constructed in Milano Due, and then in Italy, then in almost all Europe, and then in the world, as it was copied by others, is very much a transmedia architecture, a transmedia urbanism, something that they would call polyhedric design, but from the perspective, a contemporary perspective, we would see that it's basically a network of different technologies that go from infrastructures to the shape of individual bodies, like this guy that is following Russo, the celebrity of the Fratello Maggiore TV show by Mediaset, and he's going to the gym and doing exactly the same exercises that Russo is advertising through his Facebook account. This kind of radical urbanism in which buildings, together with media, together with infrastructures, together with corporations, is shaping from bodies to cities to territories, is in a way what makes architecture powerful in the case of Berlusconi and in the case of Milano Due. From cities to urban enactments, the second one. This is also something that is happening as a counter-political project. In exactly, more or less exactly in the same moment, in 1968, there's this huge opening of the Murid diaspora. The Murid, as you know, is the Sunni community from Touba, Senegal, that started to migrate. The males, the young males, of the community started to migrate to European capitals and then to the US and probably also in Canada. You can find Murid males, young males selling things in the street. This is one of the houses that we've been studying for years now, occupied by a community that, from 4 to 6 males. This is one of the bedrooms in which 2 people are sleeping. This is a closet that was the upper part of a closet that was transformed into a bedroom. And this is the kind of the reconstruction of the house that we did. But when we see the way it works, equally to the network that Berlusconi constructed, is associated with a number of restaurants, African restaurants, with mosques that are not more fancy than the apartment where they live in, with cell phones that connect them to the farms through also the use of phone parlors in different cities in the world. Allowed them to be connected to the farms in Touba, like this one that we studied, in which the female, the elder people, the youngs, the people with disabilities are staying. In a way, when we see their enactment, it's similar to the one of Berlusconi in the way that it's also composed by heterogeneous, by networks of heterogeneous technologies that are evolving within time and that are that can only be described as transmedia urbanisms. In my opinion, power, if we want to analyze the way power is embodied in architecture, there's a need to develop specific tools that are able to operate within these enactments. And in a way, we see that the city as a concept, as this fixed patch in the land, is not necessarily working that well to explain power, but it's much more useful, or at least for us, concepts like the urban enactments that could look a little bit like this and would be changing all the time, like these foams composed by all these different things. So in a way, I would propose, or at least that's my proposal in our work, to think of the way different things get together as a way to discover and to operate in the production of power and counterpower in contemporary societies. The third thing that I would like to propose tonight is no happy endings. This is, I mean, probably you think that this is a very bad rendering, and I agree from several perspectives. We could see that it's not that brilliant, but it's actually super important. It was produced by Howard Digital, that is one of the most important architectural renderings companies in the world. So basically, we have to look carefully to this rendering because it's a little bit like a Ferrari of the architectural renderings, even though we might see the architecture as not that exciting. But this architecture is not working alone in the rendering. The renderings have the particularity of producing the society or showing the society that comes with architecture. And because they're done as design tools by teams that very often have designers and architects within them, somehow we can see that they're working as a kind of a passing point of the making and the design of societies or interventions in societies. What is interesting for me is how this is working. Basically, we're all here designed by the rendering. The rendering is not showing us a design, but it's designing us. Why do I say this? Because basically, we're on top of a super expensive sailing boat, as we see here. So automatically, we're sailors, high-end sailors. We're in a kind of very nice weather, kind of Caribbean weather in Caribbean Sea. So it's a sunny day, we're probably rich, we're sailing, we're on holidays, and we're witnessing something that is happening in association with this architecture. What is that we're witnessing here? These two people with these other two people are on the way of kind of performing some kind of narrative. And the narrative, of course, is very obvious. We don't have to be super clever to find out what's going on, but just in case we're missing it, we see that here there's kind of a consummation of what's going on here. In a way, when we see the way renderings are being produced, there's kind of a recurrent story, something that is repeatedly appearing in renderings that has to do with the making of romance, or how architecture instigates the making of romance, or makes it more likely. This is probably much more appreciated by us as design-oriented architects. This is a rendering that was, probably you haven't seen it before, because it was only shown to the potential buyers of the apartments that they're selling now in the 432 Park Avenue building. That is the most expensive residential building in New York. It's not completed yet. It was designed by a huge compound of architects that was led, or kind of the main structural thing was done by Raphael Vignoli Architects. But nevertheless, Deborah Berg did the interiors, her office. And it's very important to see that D-Box, a group of architects that are working doing renderings and videos, and they're doing this huge amount of renderings for Foster, for Vignoli, for all these developers, were the ones that from the very beginning were doing the kind of image of the building. When we see what's the way these images are produced, it's something that is related to the one that we saw before. This guy, this woman here, was selected among 450 models. There were 5 days of auditions, but that was not the most difficult part. The most difficult actor here is this guy here, what they call in D-Box the Danny DeVito guy. The Danny DeVito guy is not an actor. He's an actual businessman. He's a very close friend from David Marklow, the developer that is behind the tower. And he was selected to bring authenticity to the image, to the rendering, and to represent potential clients. So in a way, what we're seeing here is kind of a magician's trick in which we're having the image. If we were potential buyers here, we would identify ourselves with this guy, and we would like to be someone like him, that we know that by looking at this or by being part of this architecture has the opportunity to get lucky with this super beautiful woman. When we see the way the role that D-Box was playing was crucial. They were selecting materials. They would have presentation with a big table and all the materials that they would propose for the renderings that ended up being the materials that were used in the interiors. So for instance, the idea of bringing this huge piece of marble, of Carrara marble, to the apartments was something that happened in the rendering and ended up being part of the design. As many of the other things, like this wooden floor, many of the finishing, many of the big decisions in terms of design were not decided by the kind of official architects, but by the rendering company, as many other things. In a way, the rendering is not naive. It's kind of connecting design with the making of societies. I could say that it's the part of the design that is operating in the realm that Silvio Berlusconi inaugurated. Is this image the one that puts together the materiality of the building and the decision-making that has to do with its materiality, with the society that is depicting, with the connection of guys like this one that are at 2 in the morning? All this is information that we get from a long research that I did in Columbia with my students on 432 Park Avenue, in which we interview, of course, the D-Box people, Deborah Burke, Rafael Vignoli's team, clients, salesmen and saleswomen, saleswomen. And for instance, there was a saleswoman that told us that most of the sales start at 2 in the morning somewhere where a rich person is kind of with his or her iPad looking at apartments, and then he sees an image like this, and at 2 in the morning he decides, mixed with the kind of feeling of being not totally awakened, so in a mixture of dreams and kind of other things, he decides that he needs something like this, and then he calls or sends an email, and a broker that hired by him at some point arrives to the apartment building, and as a result of that, he ends up being part of this. So this transmedia performance is somehow unchained by the making of images like this. In a way, this all brings us to this kind of political construction that is Pretty Woman and the idea of the happy ending. So architectural renderings are very much insistent of an idea that was developed in the movies, in the movie industries from the 40s. And basically something that is jumping from the media of the movies to the houses, to the apartments, and to the renderings that are depicting them, making them happen, are the places where the decisions, the material decisions are taken, and are part of the society making that architecture is part of. This was the origin of a project that we developed like 10 years ago now, that is the Plasencia Clergy House. These were images that we were finding all around the building. Actually, it was a building that was constructed in the 15th century that had a 19th century extension and that required a huge transformation and an extension, an addition. These photographs were taken in the 1950s. This is in Spain. This is during the Franco times, a little bit after the Civil War. And this is a minor seminar of the Catholic Church. It was that at that time. And this was the kind of situations that the students that were coming here to get the first step in their education to become Catholic priests were having. You see here again that there's this kind of radical intervention of the architecture in which the construction of the seminar was very much shaping the city, was shaping the daily life of these people, but was also shaping their bodies. And you see that this kind of exercise making could be something anecdotal, but not really. When we see the participation of architecture in these things, was kind of crucial to have an architecture that could actively make sure that the children coming here would after a while be normalized and would be regulated from the way they would behave to their bodies, to their beliefs. This is the bedrooms, and they were specially designed so in each of them there would be one of these child sleeping. They would arrive here around when they were around 10 years old, and there was this corridor that was used every night for a priest to go all around watching what was the children's behavior. It's very interesting to see that, of course, they would check that these people were not playing or were not reading magazines or were not playing poker or, I don't know, drinking whiskey or whatever. But basically, for me, it's very important because it's kind of an evidence of the way architecture was playing a key role here. We transformed the building because basically, we won the competition and that was the main thing. But the second thing is that the building had to be transformed because there were not so many children that at the age of 10 would arrive here wanting to become a Catholic priest. But there were many old priests that require geriatric assistance. So this building, the Catholic Church, a local Catholic Church, planned to transform this building into an elder's residence in which they could receive medical assistance. But we wanted to reprogram politically the building. If the building had been so far a machine to produce a homogenized society, we wanted these people that have lived for decades on their own in tiny villages as priests that were kind of the leaders of Catholic communities to arrive here and keep this kind of citizenship that they had been experiencing in the last years. We transformed the building. This is the extension that we did. This is the way we transformed the connection of the building with every single street around it, so it would be very easy to connect it. We produced kind of tiny squares where people could actually spend time, and so the idea was to open the whole community to the village where it is. But this is the way it looks, the garden. This is the interior. This is the chapel. This is the chapel. Yeah, this is the director of this place talking with his cell phone in the chapel. This is him with the cross. Initially, he didn't like it because it was a neon cross that we designed, but then we told him that Jesus Christ was the light of the world, and he agreed with that, so we're very happy. But basically, we designed these things to make this political transformation. We decided to design these political tools, political toys that we spread all around the house and that were intended to require from the people that were using the house to take kind of arguable and kind of risky decisions in order for the house to become useful. For instance, basically we were thinking that we could activate politically the daily life of the house by introducing something or many things that would work like remote controls. And we all remember when we're in a room and there's a remote control and someone takes the remote control and chooses a channel, automatically there's a huge debate. Someone said, no, we shouldn't be playing this or we shouldn't be watching this. There's another thing. Basically, we wanted to do the same with the architecture of the Plasencia Clergy House. For instance, the garden, we divided it in tiny lots, and each person living here would get one of these numbers, so basically one lot, but we never defined the paths and the limits of the lots. So basically, in order to use them, they had to discuss the boundaries with their neighbors, and that was a huge discussion. This is an image that we took a year after. Stefano Boeri wanted to publish it in Domus, and he didn't believe that there were elder people living here in this kind of floor painted house. So he sent a photographer, and he took these photographs with the elder people around. And this photograph I love because this guy is not here kind of giving scale. So we have but he's basically watching us because he had convinced a number of his neighbors to give him his lots, and he would basically share the crops with them. So there was a huge political process in which he had been negotiating the lots and kind of agreeing with them to share the letters that were arriving here at this point. So he was watching because he knew that if we took the letters, basically he would be in trouble with his neighbors. This kind of political construction is based, of course, on negotiation, but also on discussion and disagreement at some point. But it's composing the daily life of the clergy house as something that is enabling the individuals to have their own ideas and to perform this as a component of being part of the community. This is kind of the rendering that I would propose here. So as opposed to the rendering of Pretty Woman, in which it's very hard to believe that such an exciting woman would agree to spend her life with this boring guy, basically here there's not a need of simplifying the situation or making homogeneous this society. Everyone's kind of fighting. This woman here is not happy at all with what these guys are doing, but nevertheless they agree, for instance, to have this tiny party one day in which we were discussing the house. I would propose that this kind of society, again, like the one of the pavilion, the Barcelona pavilion, with this contingency, with this kind of problematic aging, breaking, experimenting realities, is the rendering of society that architecture can also provide. And the fourth point that I would like to discuss today is kind of two cases of associative design. The first is the ESCARAVOX, and the second one, COSMO, which is giving the name to this talk. The ESCARAVOX is this project that we did to intervene a very particular social contingency. This is the distribution of the most important cultural centers in Madrid. As you see, they're very much, I mean, these two ones are kind of the exception, but all of them are in the center of the city in the most expensive part of the urban development. The ones that are basically, in terms of real estate, where the most expensive apartments are sold. This is the distribution of independent spaces of the most important one, like the super important ones, independent spaces where culture is challenged and created in a way. When we see the pattern in which this tissue is happening, is totally different to this one. In a way, there's a divorce between those people who are, or those groups who are independently engaging with culture, and those centers that are getting the public funding and the private funding to show it, to kind of powerful confirm what is valuable in culture, in contemporary culture. We wanted to bring together these two networks, and we were working on different projects to do that, but then one day we were called by this place. This is Matadero in Madrid, and it's the old slaughterhouse. It was designed as a series of buildings where animals were killed. And there's huge squares where the trucks, initially animal vehicles, kind of driven vehicles, and then trucks were loaded and unloaded here. So basically these huge spaces were designed not for humans, but for the trucks. And now that this compound of buildings is being transformed into a cultural center, a massively used cultural center in the city of Madrid, the spaces are becoming totally important, and the habitability of those spaces in summer is very, very uncomfortable because basically there's no shade, and those who know the climate of Madrid know how difficult that makes daily life in August. So we were asked to design something that would provide shade and would make it possible for people to cross the huge spaces without dying in August, but at the same time something that would not compromise the use of the space. So if they wanted to do a huge concert here, by putting together all this space, they could still do it. Or if they wanted to have 3 tiny markets here, they could happen. And the shading devices should not be on the way of those activities, those changing activities. What we proposed was to include or to develop these moving devices that could provide shade, and it would be possible to organize them and dispose them in a way that anyone could cross the squares, but in a way that they were kind of not compromising the adaptability because they could be moved all around the place. So basically, we ended up designing them and we proved, this is our office, and we basically on the floor proved that those things could move and were not compromising this adaptability. But we decided to construct them with very cheap technologies, inexpensive technologies like the structures of the pivot center irrigation devices that we could see in the land very often, that were developed in the 40s in the US, in Nebraska, and in the 50s, in the late 50s, and they were produced massively all around the world. And now that the patents are free, they're very inexpensively produced in any country. And we were using them in a customized way by using the components but assembling them differently. Not only that, but by using other massively produced but customizedly assembled components, we could not only produce the shading device, but equip them within budget with additional elements like projectors, screens, speakers, even furniture that we designed specifically for this. So they would not only be providing shade, but they could become infrastructures that could be available for people for this creative tissue in Madrid. So they could arrive here and without being invited by the institution, play their own music, read their poetry, play movies. So together with the equipment, as something that we could kind of steal from the budget by using massively produced components, we could complete it with all this furniture, with all this equipment, and they could become the location where situations like these ones could be automatically produced for people that would never be invited to such a cultural center. These are the components that we use. These are the irrigation systems. You can see that something like this, the span from here to here is 40 meters. So you can add this thing. It's 16,000 euros, something like $18,000. This is the membrane that we use. This is the square meter price. This is what we were using for the hanging gardens. This is the kind of chairs. And this is the way that we reassemble all these components in a way that the producer would never have done, so they would become this. This is the ESCARAVOX already being used. You can see here, you see in the different configurations that basically the people are able to transform the space by moving the furniture, using the equipment differently. For instance, this is a very kind of fragmented celebration. There's people doing many different things. But this is a very concentrated one. One day that there was these people that were presenting an independent collection of records that they were, or for instance, this is a day that there were different activities happening in different points of the ESCARAVOX. This is a day, for instance, that this woman started to sing copla, which is a very traditional Spanish singing. And you see that she was able to bring here all these people that normally would never come to these cultural centers, but together with them there were all these hipster crowd that were the ones that normally would come here, but also there were people coming with their children, and even people coming with their dogs that would be kind of free around the square while the owners would be having a beer here and listening to this music. This is a very funny story because this girl met this guy that is a knife thrower, and they met here because the knife thrower came here to do a show, to do a show, and then she was singing, and after a while they decided to do a show together. This is another assemblage that we brought together here. And in a way, this was the origin of the project. For me, it's very interesting here because the kind of the material investment, the balance between the material investment and the capacity for this to bring together different publics was huge. And as opposed to other buildings that were not getting that much public here in the Matadero compound, this was by far the one that was getting the hugest amount of public. This is getting now more than 1,600 people every night performing there and acting as an audience of these freely produced events. Okay, this is the origin of this other project with which I'm going to conclude, which is COSMO, and we call it Give Me a Pipe and I Will Move the World. I think that, or at least try, at least a part of it. But this again, this idea that we could do tiny things, tiny material mobilizations that could have a huge social impact, and they could be seen as karate keys, in which basically by, like in karate, we could, with a tiny thing, move a huge context, a social context. This is research that I did 2 years ago in Los Angeles with CalArts. This is a guy that is called Abel. He lives now in Silver Lake in Los Angeles. This is his garden. He's originally from Uruguay. He was actually very much related to irrigation systems, the pivot center irrigation system, because in Montevideo, in Colonia, where he comes from, in the 60s, the irrigation systems arrived with international corporations that were operating the land. They bought the farms, like the farm of his family, and he had to emigrate. He emigrated initially to Alaska, where they were building the Alaska gas pipe, and then he moved at some point to Los Angeles. What is interesting for me is that his friends in Uruguay, in Montevideo, all traveled to different parts of the world, but they kept together, they kind of kept talking, first with letters that they were sending regularly every week, and then with the development of internet, they chat every single morning through Skype. But it's very important is that they reproduce, wherever they went, the gardens that they had in the farming colonia in Uruguay. So his friends, some of them living in Sicily, in Italy, others living in Alaska, others living in Venezuela, where there was a huge migration from Colonia, they all have gardens, and they keep growing the same things that they grew in Colonia, in Uruguay. So in a way, what happened there was not that they were removed, but that their network was spatialized. It was dispersed in the world, and they reproduced a fragment of what before composed their community in Colonia. Every morning he chats in Skype, as I told you, with his friends from Colonia that are the same age that him and haven't seen each other for more than 40 years now. What is very interesting for me is that when he's got a good crop, when he gets, for instance, these amazing zucchinis, he sends the seeds to his friends. So they keep this kind of material relationship in which seeds travel all around the world and grow in different parts of the planet, keeping together, bringing in existence a network that initially was very concentrated in a tiny town and now is dispersed all around the world. For me, this is an amazing urbanism, an urbanism that is a counter-political urbanism in the way that is opposing to many of the trends that were introduced with huge infrastructures like the irrigation systems. And it's something that we were trying to put together in this book that we did with CalArts, with a number of stories of how the infrastructures had been used, had been recomposed by many people as a way of resisting the predominant transformations of everyday life. This is the installation we did, prototyping all these urbanisms, but COSMO was the opportunity to bring it further. This is COSMO. Is, you know, the result of this competition that MoMA PS1 runs every year that we won. This is the first one that was done with gelatin, and it's very interesting that they brought an urban beach to the courtyard of the PS1, so the people that were there in the summer could enjoy the water. Water at that point was something that was political, but was political in the way that it was part of a hedonistic way of living the city. So the people that were performing this, or were doing this, traveled to, the curators traveled to Berlin, and they saw the urban beaches, and they said that they were amazed by the people naked in the middle of the city enjoying the water. But we saw that that was not the way politics are done anymore. Like hedonistic life is being taken by shopping malls. It's more something that is advertised by Apple. It's very much something that is promoted by Nike. So what is that is politic now? Also, we knew that there was a huge limitation in MoMA PS1 in the way that it was a temporary installation, and that was something that was seen mainly there, or it was not that relevant in the way that it was operating within the city. But we saw that there was a huge impact in other ways. Like, for instance, more than 60,000 people, very well-informed people, could experience this there in the PS1. More than 416,000 people would go to see it at the exhibition that MoMA organized on COSMO. And also that would expand to museums all around the world. It would have a huge impact online. And basically, it would have the opportunity to bring an issue and to somehow produce an online interaction that could change or could contribute to slightly change the way people thought about water and water pipes. Pipes and water is a huge thing in New York. But the discussion of pipes is no longer, or water, is no longer to have fun with water, but what's the way that people in Bolivia could have access to water? Or what's the way that water that is used, or the way fracking is happening in Williston or in Pennsylvania is not affecting the water wells that are the source of water for the communities that are living there. Or for instance, water treatment, is the cost of water treatment plants is the way that we engage politically with water and pipes now. So the discussion has become much more complex. And when we see the way that the water treatment plants are distributed in a place like New York City, we see that there's a huge investment. Billions of dollars are spent every year. Is by far the most expensive public investment in the city of New York. And the wastewater treatment plants look like this. They're super fancily designed now, but when we see the way they are actually happening in the city, we see that they're fenced, centralized, are unscrutable, impossible to read pieces of urbanism that no one has the possibility to read or to evaluate as part of the daily life. We thought that there was another way of doing this. There were other traditions, like the traditions of the natural wastewater treatment ecosystems, like this one that was developed by John Todd, this eco machine, that had the particularity of not being centralized, of being not only something that is kind of serving people, but is people who are making it possible and are making them evolve, is constructing citizenship, is opening the process so anyone could read it, is transformable, reprogrammable, is adaptable, is compatible with daily life. It's got all those things that we thought that would make or would render infrastructures much more political and much more accessible for a participatory evaluation and transformation of infrastructures. This is COSMO. And this is the people that made it possible, this huge list of people. It's very interesting that in order to do that, we had to put together, to assemble again, a huge society that was participated by some of the most important engineers, from John Shnier, the expert on water treatment, from the Netherlands, to Arup, that did the hydraulics, to Bach, that did the structures. But not only that, we had to bring together institutions like the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, or for instance, activists that have been doing activism on New York water for decades now, or students that were enthusiastic about bringing together all this knowledge, or for instance, and doing research on certain aspects of it, or for instance, a network of gardeners and gardening communities all around New York that participated producing each tiny piece of garden that is included in COSMO. COSMO looks like this. It's a machine that is composed by a series of ecosystems. We put polluted water taken directly from the sewage system of New York and provided by the Department of Environmental Protection. We see here the dirty water arriving to COSMO. We make the water go through a series of different ecosystems. The ones in the base are wetland ecosystems that are designed so they bring a huge amount of diversity. So there's always different actors that are able to decompose and metabolize the molecules that are suspended in the water, the polluting ones. This is the way they look. It's very important that they're very diverse. So there's a huge amount of different insects, microorganisms, plants that are able to, each of them, able to metabolize different components, so the response could be adaptive to the different composition of the wastewater. From there, the water, it needs to circulate through these tanks for a series of days, and there's a combination of a process of metabolizing the components in the water, and then sedimentation, settlement at the bottom of the tanks. Then the water is pumped here to this system of clear tubes that are maximizing the capacity of the water to be exposed to the UV rays of of the sun, and by keeping the water exposed to the UV rays for 2 days, we can get rid of 90% of the bacteria that could be incompatible with humans. Then the water moves to what we call the algae bag, where the nitrogen and the phosphate within the water is removed by floating algae that maximize the capacity of producing photosynthesis, basically, and they need a huge amount of nitrates and phosphate that they take from the water. And from there, the water jumps to what we call the algae scrubber here, this pink thing with circles, that is kind of a falling waterfall that increases the diluted oxygen within the water, and therefore makes it possible that when it comes back to the tanks, the microorganisms and the plants and everything that is doing their job down there could survive and could actually live and reproduce in best conditions. So basically, the water moves through this system once and again in a cycle, and by doing that, after a few days, the water becomes drinkable. Something that we assessed, we had an agreement with the master in interface development of the NYU, and they put sensors in the water so we could control the quality of the water. That was not only to check the security and to make sure that we didn't have any problem within the water, but also to communicate it. So a big part of this was that we could also make that visible. This is the way the system looked. And the analysis of the sensors were introduced every 2 days in an app that anyone could download. You can actually download it now. It's COSMO MoMA PS1, in which the evolution of these parameters would make visible, not only to the people going to the PS1, but to a huge online community that could be following the evolution of the water, opening the process and unblackboxing what normally is something that is totally hidden. But not only that, they developed an interface of light that was projected on the hoses. So at night, the whole system became a datascape that was informing with colors and with the intensity of the light of the evolution of the parameters. You can see here, this is the way it was produced. We basically, again, hackered components that were massively produced for the irrigation systems, but we composed them differently. So it was the specificity of the design was not in the delicacy of the components, but in the way they were brought together, they were assembled together. That helped us not only keep the prices low, but also to make the whole system recyclable. And now all these components are traveling to different places, and they're reused in many different infrastructures. Some of them have nothing to do with this, but others are reproducing COSMO elsewhere. The gardens were brought by people that were already doing communal gardens in New York, and when everything finished, they took them back to the place where they were brought. All these, as I said, there was a possibility of people that were as far as in India, that many people were following this in India, for instance, to follow the evolution of the water. We actually included within the water bacteria that in some houses could react to the purity of water and therefore make it and become photoluminescent when the water was clear enough. And that was something very exciting to see happening. We communicated, we did an online channel in which we communicated the information that we had to bring together to do it so people could reproduce COSMO in their places. And now it's happening. And we're following now 5 different gardens that are happening in different parts of the world that were reproducing the knowledge that was tested in COSMO. We also have a Tumblr in which we brought together the cultural and political environment in which the discussion of water was important, explaining at what point COSMO was proposing an alternative to many of these discussions, or was empowering some minority cultures that were very important at one point and somehow were lost. This is the way it looks again, and also it became a place that could be nicely inhabited, because of course it was a garden, it was providing shade, it was evaporating water. So in the hot New York summer, it was a place that was not only producing a conversation, but was hosting it right there underneath the COSMO thing. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is that when we look at architecture, we look at buildings, and we look at the material devices. But for me, what is important is how these things are bringing publics together, are constructing citizenships, are radical projects that are shaping land, but are also shaping society and individuals, are distributing within the network things, like the case of Colonia, but are also shaping and making possible certain discussions, are providing calculability to certain situations, are making actors or getting them empowered, or are distributing and kind of challenging the power of people like Berlusconi, like in the case of the Murris that were contesting the Berlusconi power. In a way, I think that when we see these photographs, there's a need to recompose them and to re-render them together with all these things, together with these communities, together with all these situations, with these discussions, with these social constructions, in a way with all this that makes architecture relevant and makes it capable of responding the undesirable powers that we have to confront. Thank you very much.
Take a few questions.
Yeah, of course, of course. Questions, complaints, petitions, whatever. Please.
I've had the pleasure to live in Madrid, so I've been to some of your projects, and thank you for so much for being here. My question is, I really gravitate towards what you're doing, but this is more kind of an aesthetic question, like why the use of the really strong like color that like comes through your projects, and I think is a key way in which they are received. Because you're talking about like political issues and the transversal nature of architecture to different disciplines and everything, but you're using that language like really deliberately. So I'm just wondering where the origin of that comes from.
Yeah, it's a very good question. For us, the colors, the language of the architecture is very much about communication. So the devices that we're doing are very much reading from. We have to understand. For us, we have to acknowledge that they're working as media. So they're communicating things, bringing people together, kind of collecting them and convening them. And in a way, they're signs at the same time that there are spaces of discussion, are TV sets in the way that the images that are produced are traveling to other places. So it's very much something that the language that we're developing is coming from graphic design, from set design, from things that are participated very much of the traditions of transmedia architectures, I would call them. So the use of color was vital on that. If imagine, for instance, the ESCARAVOX. The ESCARAVOX, one of the things that is very important is how those communities that are never part of these cultural centers become visible. And one of the ways that we become visible in this society, in our contemporary society, is, for instance, emerging in social media. The fact that we're providing something that is colorful and that is easily could be distinguished with the whole background is very important. Otherwise, whatever happens there is not first something that is identified as something that is happening in Matadero. It's happening in Matadero, and it's something that therefore would not be that sexy to emerge in the media, and therefore would not be that successful in bringing these performances visible, not only there, but also in the way we communicate to each other. So colors for us is very important, but that was also important for Berlusconi. Berlusconi, when he was doing these buildings, he was very much aware that they had to look good in Vogue. We interviewed people that were doing those photographs at that time with Berlusconi, and the question of color was vital for them. If you see the interiors that they were producing, were interiors that were totally designed so they could be photographed and published in fashion magazines. Fashion magazines that at that time were publishing works that were competing with architecture. And when those who have some familiarity with media, for instance, if you go to a newspaper, they have the photographs there on a table, and they select a photograph because of the colors or things like that. And then people and architecture compete to each other, or fashion and architecture compete to each other. So in a way, the whole language that we developed is very much influenced by the fact that we're trying to connect different realms. And we understand that those realms need to be connected by material that needs to be crossing from one media to others. But in the same way, when we do a movie, we do the movie very architectural. So the material that comes in that movie is something that could be also transferable and could be translated into an architectural proposition, for instance. So for instance, now that we did this show, Superpowers of 10, one of the things that is very important for us is to produce geometries and compositions that could be seen as urban, as compositions of buildings. And we were looking even at the tradition of this place, of the Bauhaus, and the way, for instance, it influenced the design of American cities. So this is kind of an important thing for us, how to design in a way that things could travel from one media to another.
So would it be, do you think that a practice like yours would be possible out of the academic world?
Yeah. We did most of the work without academy, basically. I mean, not in the way that I would defend that architecture is an intellectual profession, in a way. So, and that's a dimension that is very important not to lose, in a way, for me. I mean, we're designers, I personally calculate my structures, and I know how to construct, and I go to the construction site, and I love these things, but I love them precisely because I understand that they're connected with big discussions that are making architecture very relevant. So I think that the connection with thinking, I would call, it's super important. But thinking is also reading, attending lectures, discussing things, writing, not necessarily means to have a position in the academia. For many years, I've been teaching in the ETSAM for many years, and I teach on different places, but also there's periods of my life that I haven't been teaching, and I was not part of the academia. And we were doing research in the office, and that was not a problem at all. But it's not academia. No, it was academia because we were reading the books of the people that were writing on those things, and we were discussing with them, and we were trying to call them and visit them and go to see them, and if they were giving a lecture close to where we were, we could go. But in terms, for instance, of economy, that is something very pragmatical. We always organize our work so we would be paid for doing the research somehow. And that's something that doesn't mean that our clients were kind of cheated, but we basically exposed them that it was important to do some research. Even in the Plasencia Clergy House, we at some point told the people of the Catholic Church that the Catholic Church needed to have some kind of spatial research, and that was not happening. And then we found that they couldn't give us money, but they could give us resources. And that means that they would give us information, access to archives. They facilitated us, for instance, to have meetings with important people that otherwise would have been impossible to meet. So in a way, we found agreements that were making it possible. And one thing that I must say, by doing research, offices become much more competitive, and competitive in a good way, because you have the opportunity to invent situations that otherwise is impossible to invent. This Matadero thing, for instance, the ESCARAVOX, was basically an invention of us. We were called to give a solution to this shading thing, but as many other people were called. More than 12 teams were called for that. But we had been doing a research on patents, and basically we had a collection of things that were patented at one time, and then the patent was free, and it was making them very cheap. And those were massively produced things that were very inexpensive. And we were trying to theorize and conceptualize what was the way that we could work with those patents that were once designed for something else, but they could be reintroduced and reassembled in architectural programs. And by doing this research, we were presented as more competitive to others. So research also makes teams competitive in a way, from a business perspective. So yes, I think we have to be part of the academia, but in a way, that's kind of also a professional way, or a way of being professional.
Thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. I'm just curious what the user thinks about your designs or your proposal, like what the cleaning lady said about what you did with the pavilion in Barcelona, what the cleaning ladies I don't know, did you get the chance to speak with?
Yeah, of course.
And
Yeah.
what did they say about?
Basically, it's very interesting, the story of the cleaning lady in the Barcelona pavilion. She's called Fanny. Fanny is from Ecuador. She was not hired directly by the Barcelona pavilion, but by the Mies van der Rohe Foundation, but by the subcontracted company. She was fired a year ago, and basically because they reduced the budget for cleaning, and now some other employees that were doing other things are doing the cleaning. But at the time that we did this project, it was funny, the woman that was working doing the cleaning, and it was very difficult to talk to her because being part of a subcontracted company, she didn't want to speak. Basically, she was told not to give any information on anything that could jeopardize the contract that her company had with the Mies van der Rohe Foundation. After a while, she accepted to talk to us. And basically, there was a number of conflicts that had to do with cleaning that she had to develop an intelligence to deal with. For instance, the people that did the reconstruction, they wanted to keep the travertine open with all the holes, as Mies van der Rohe had put it in the first place. But that was not good at all for the Barcelona weather, basically because it rains and then it starts to grow, there's mud in the holes and it starts to grow this kind of super thin kind of grass. And she had to develop a way of cleaning this travertine because she was never taught to do that. And then she developed a system in which by using a catcher machine, injecting pressured water, she would remove the water and then she would use a vacuum cleaner to remove the water from the holes. That was kind of a very intelligent way of dealing with this, something that no one else knew because she was obliged not to say anything to anyone else. So in a way, for me, it was very important to see that the expert knowledge was not only in the architects or not only in the people the engineers that were doing the maintenance, but the cleaning lady had developed a very specific knowledge that in a way related to many of the things that the team that were with Mies van der Rohe were discussing at the time that they were doing the actual pavilion. This discussion of what happened in the halls and how things grow in the halls is something that they had had before, Mies van der Rohe himself. So for me, it's very important to see that the expert knowledge is not necessarily among the official experts, but there's in the moment that you start to analyze all the different layers that make possible the making of the pavilion, the society around that is much more complex. Now, the Mies goers is the way we call, the Mies knowers is the way we call the people that visit the pavilion and take the photograph that they have already seen in the books. They would be probably very much seduced to know this connection between that knowledge of Fanny and the knowledge that was discussed in the original pavilion by Serge Revenstein, the guy that was constructing the pavilion. But that is not possible because the way the pavilion is displayed is not making available that information. I would defend that if I had to reconstruct the pavilion, I would have this information somehow discussed there. Okay, so.
I think we're good. Thank you so much.
Okay.